What if I told you that you could make a cheesecake with very minimal granulated sugar, lots of vitamins and minerals because it's made with whole food plant-based ingredients, it's dairy-free, egg-free, cholesterol-free, it only takes 30 minutes to make. Today's recipe, that is a blueberry crumble cheesecake, is going to be exactly that. Let's get to the recipe. We're first going to start by making the filling of this cheesecake. This cheesecake filling comes together in about 15 to 20 minutes, and I like to make it first because this is the most tedious task of this cheesecake. Once you get this cheesecake filling done, I sometimes save it overnight and bake the next day, so that's why we're starting with this section first. The very first step, and I highly recommend you do this, although this is optional, will be soaking your cashews and dates. So we're going to take 1 cup and 3/4 cup of raw cashews, in addition to about 12 to 15 mutual dates. You can add 20 if you want. I've tried it with all of these different variations. It totally just depends on the sweetness that you prefer. And you will soak them in boiling water for 2 hours. You can optionally do this overnight too. All you need to do is to add your ingredients to a bowl, add the boiling water to these 2 ingredients, and let it sit on the countertop. To add creaminess and richness to this cheesecake without using a processed ingredient or a store-bought vegan cream cheese, we will be using silken tofu. Add 14 grams of silken tofu. This is approximately 1 of those rectangular cartons of silken tofu to the mix, or just on a plate as we're getting our mise en place set. Silken tofu is extremely creamy and very versatile. It absorbs both savory and sweet flavors, and I think it is the perfect supplement or healthier substitute in a cheesecake filling. To ensure that these ingredients have the consistency of a cheesecake, we will be adding a thickener ingredient. My very favorite thickener for cheesecakes is arrowroot powder. I find that cornstarch works well too, but sometimes a little too well and leaves the filling too stodgy for my preference. So if you get your hands on some arrowroot powder, the link will be down in the description as well. This will be the best thickener for your cheesecake. We will be adding 1/4 cup of arrowroot powder to the mix, so set this in a small bowl and set it aside. Our additional sweeteners and flavor enhancers of our filling will be the following. We will add a 1/2 cup's worth of maple syrup. Maple syrup will help thicken and get the mixture filling blended really well in your Vitamix blender. If you're interested in a Vitamix, I will also leave that linked in the description. It's also a low glycemic sweetener. It's not as low glycemic as others on the market, but I find it works really well in cheesecakes. So measure out a 1/2 cup of maple syrup and set it aside. Next, we'll be adding a teaspoon of iodized salt. You can choose kosher salt if you prefer. I find that this makes the flavors pop, and in general, food tastes good with just a little bit of salt, but if you're avoiding it, be sure to take it out. For our vanilla flavor, we're going to be adding 1/2 tablespoon of vanilla paste or vanilla extract. And lastly, our very key ingredient to get that zingy flavor of cheesecake without adding fermented food or store-bought vegan cream cheese will be to add a 1/2 cup's worth of lemon juice, making sure to remove any seeds from the liquid. This lemon juice will add the tartness and the zing of a cheesecake when you need it in that filling. This filling will be made in your Vitamix blender. I recommend a Vitamix because it is super high speed and it's capable of really blending cashews and specifically dates. I do not like whole dates in my cheesecake filling, so the Vitamix is the perfect appliance to use in order to receive that super silky, creamy vegan cheesecake base. Start by draining your dates and cashews before adding any of the ingredients into the Vitamix. You can choose to save that water for other desserts. Before you add your dates to your Vitamix, make sure that they are de-seeded. You want to strain everything, reserve the liquid, and then add your cashews and your mutual dates to a high-speed blender. I then like to add the tofu, the silken tofu, because this allows everything to blend really, really well. I like to do this one of 2 ways. First, I like to blend my dates, my cashews, and my silken tofu, just those 3 ingredients together to make sure that they blend really, really well. Although, if you're feeling lazy, you can just add all of the ingredients I mentioned all at the same same time, and the mixture will still blend. You'll just have to be a little patient and make sure to scrape the sides of your Vitamix as you're going. So it's at this point that I like to try the mixture to make sure it's smooth and enough lemon juice, because it's always good to taste test along the way. Perfect. We're gonna add the salt now, and it's gonna add a really nice balance, but you wanna taste test before because we're gonna add the cornstarch and arrowroot powder, and you don't wanna ingest too much of that. Now, because your girl is busy, we're gonna refrigerate the filling and bake this cheesecake in a series of days because it lessens the load. Into the refrigerator it goes. To make your crumb for the cheesecake, it's super easy. You want to take anywhere between 12 to 20 graham crackers. This depends if you have small graham crackers or sheets of graham crackers, and add them to a food processor. I like using my Ninja food processor because it's super high speed. Then add 2 to 3 tablespoons of melted vegan butter, or alternatively use avocado oil. Avocado oil works best because it has a neutral flavor. Set this aside, and this will be the base of your blueberry crumble cheesecake. On the day you're ready to bake, be sure to preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. When you do this, I also add a small tray to the bottom that has a little bit of depth, because when we're ready to bake the cheesecake, we're going to be adding 2 to 3 cups of boiling water to mimic what would be a bain-marie. I think that's how you pronounce it. A water bath in English, how we typically use it here in the States or in the UK. And this will ensure that the bake of the cheesecake does not sink in the middle, especially in the filling. So I like to add a little bit of a tray, a deep tray, to the bottom while it's preheating. We want to start at 400 because we're going to bake the crust first, par-bake the crust, and then we'll add all of our filling ingredients and our toppings, and then bake at a lower temperature, ideally around 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's when I start to preheat the oven after I've made the crust. In order to assemble your cheesecake, you're going to be using a springform pan. I like to add compostable parchment paper on top of the base of the springform pan. I clip it in, and then I grease the entire inside of the springform pan, the bottom, and especially the edges of the springform pan. Because when your cheesecake has finally set after the refrigeration overnight, it will ensure an easy release from your springform pan. Once you've prepped your pan for baking, add your graham cracker crumb bottom to your springform pan. I like to add all of the crumbs to the bottom section of the springform pan, and using a cup, I just very gently spread out the crust as evenly as possible, leaving a little bit on the edges as well because I like a nice edge on my cheesecake. Once you've spread out the graham cracker crust, bake in the oven for about 8 minutes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Make sure to keep an eye on your crust because you don't want it to start to burn. In the meantime, while your crust is baking, we will be preparing our crumble topping. The crumble topping comes together super quickly. I like to put all of my dry ingredients in a bowl, and those are the following: 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour. You can alternatively use a combination of all-purpose flour and whole wheat flour for an extra health kick and a little bit of flavor. 1/4 cup of almond flour. I like to have this handy because it adds a little bit of nuttiness, and also it adds a little bit of protein to that top crust. For our sugar replacements, I like to use monk fruit sugar whenever possible because I find that it has a really low glycemic index, and it also has a really lovely sugar and sweet profile. So to replace it, I used 3/4 cup of monk fruit sweetener. And lastly, our flavor ingredient for the crust would be the salt. Add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Combine these with a whisk, and then we'll add our wet ingredients to create that crumble topping. Instead of butter, I like to use 1/3 cup of avocado oil or melted coconut oil, but you can also use vegan butter if you prefer that buttery taste, and 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract or paste for extra flavor and deliciousness. Add those wet ingredients. I combined the oil and the vanilla paste in one singular bowl. Add those to the dry ingredients that compose all the flours and the salt and the almond flour, so on and so forth, and whisk together. When things are getting nice and crumbly, I like to put my hands in and make sure that they get really crumbly and no crumbs that are too big are in the mixture. Since this is a blueberry cheesecake, we're going to be adding 1.5 cups cups of either fresh or frozen blueberries. I've done this cheesecake with both. You can use both and they work almost identically. Your crust has been baked and you're ready to assemble your cheesecake. You're gonna take your filling from the refrigerator or that you just made and you're gonna add it to that springform pan that you just baked your crust in. Add it to the middle and then spread it out nice and evenly with a spatula. Then you're gonna add your 1.5 cups of blueberries super easily on top, as uniform as possible, followed by the crumble topping. I like to make sure that there's a generous amount of crumble topping on mine because I find it super delicious, super comforting, but add as little or as much as you want. I found that I used half of the crumble topping that I made because it does make a generous amount. Your oven has been at 400 degrees Fahrenheit because we par-baked the crust. You want to lower it down to 350 Fahrenheit. My oven runs really hot. It's an old school, outdated, non-convection oven. It doesn't have the fancy settings that most ovens have now, so I actually set my oven a little cooler than 350. But regardless, if you have a more modern one, I encourage you to put it at 350 Fahrenheit. Once the temperature has been lowered, you want to boil that water that I previously mentioned, 2 to 3 cups of water. It doesn't have to be exact. You just want 2 cups or more. I add it to that tray that we preheated on the bottom rack of our oven when we were preheating our oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. This water will ensure that your cheesecake bakes beautifully and it does not crumble in the middle. So add it first, and then afterwards, I like to place my cheesecake on another baking tray to ensure that nothing seeps at the bottom. Sometimes when we add oil to these cheesecake pans, the oil will drip from the sides of the springform pan and kind of stain the water or your oven. To avoid that from happening, I add it to a smaller tray and I just easily add it to the middle rack where I've placed my oven rack, and I let it bake on this lower temperature anywhere between 325 to 350 Fahrenheit for 70 to 75 minutes. I do not take my cheesecake out this entire time because I want it to stay in the oven. That water bath at the bottom is going to ensure that your oven stays at a more consistent temperature, even though it's a little bit more outdated like mine. So just leave it in there for the duration of time, making sure to eye your cheesecake to make sure that that top layer of crumble topping does not burn, especially when you use coconut oil or vegan butter. These fats that have a lot of saturated fat, they tend to burn quickly, so just be mindful. Once your cheesecake has completely baked, take it out of the oven and let it cool completely, or at least a minimum of probably an hour on top of your oven. It's gonna be a little wet, it's gonna be a little jiggly, that's completely normal. You want to ensure though that it jiggles just a little bit, especially in the middle, but not too much because that means it's completely underbaked. Then, when it's sort of manageable, we need to let the cheesecake set overnight in the refrigerator. This is non-negotiable. You can do like 4 to 6 hours, but sometimes it's just still too soft. So please allow a whole night's rest in the refrigerator. This will produce the optimal vegan cheesecake and just cheesecake in general, folks. So definitely don't miss out on this step. The following day, it's super easy. You want to undo the clip on your springform pan, release your cheesecake, and it will be released easily because you've greased the outer edge of your springform pan perfectly, and cut yourself a slice and enjoy. Now let's go to some candid taste testing and review of this remarkable cheesecake. Time to try the cheesecake. Ooh, it's got a nice crunch on top because of the crumble. Holding together but soft in the middle. That's a good sign. When George smiles right after he tries something, means it's all right. Cheers. Okay, the crumble is really delicious. It's got crunchy bits because it's really nicely baked. And the filling is firm, but not heavy, despite all the cashews and despite all the dates. What do you think?
I think it's really good. This top part is the most surprising. Almost like caramelized. I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah, it's like double crusted, I guess.
You heard it here, folks. Delicious vegan cheesecake with wholesome ingredients, low in sugar, and just all around really good. If you enjoyed this recipe, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a recipe. This has been Rebecca Martinez. I hope you loved this one. Let me know in the comments below what other recipes you'd like to be made here on this channel, and I'll see you next time.